My name is Greg Holmes. I'm the Southern Oregon Planning Advocate for 1000 Twins of Oregon. For those of you who aren't familiar, we're a land use advocacy group, a statewide group. I am the Southern Oregon office. My office is in Grants Pass, but I work throughout the Southern Oregon region here. Thank you for coming to the Land Use 101 panel. Today we're going to hear from 3 different speakers on different aspects of land and what you can and can't do with it and how you qualify for certain benefits. The first speaker is going to be Lori Williams, who is with the Jackson County Assessor's Office, going to talk about how you can qualify and keep your farm assessment on your property. Lori has been with the county for about 2.5 years now, and prior to being an assessor was a licensed realtor, so knows something about different aspects of the land. Our second speaker is going to be Tyler Martin, who is with the Oregon Water Resources Department. Tyler's going to talk about water rights and property, and Tyler has been with the state for about 5 years now. He works throughout the state on water resource issues, and most recently has come to Southern Oregon. And finally, Kelly Matting is the Jackson County Development Services Director. She manages the county planning department, among other things, and we'll talk some about land use regulations here in the county and what is and is not allowed on farmland and how you find out more information. I also want to point out in the audience we have a commissioner from the Land Conservation and Development Commission, Sherman Lamb, who is Land Conservation and Development Commission is sort of the policy body for the statewide land use program. And we also have Randy White, Jackson Soil and Water. Randy who knows about soil surveys and that sort of thing, and they'll both be available for questions during the question period. The speakers have asked me to ask you to hold questions until after all 3 of them have done their presentations, or we'll never get through all of the materials we have to get through. And after this session, if we don't have enough time for all questions, there is going to be a break and then a networking session, and representatives from these agencies will be here to follow up with you. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori, and we'll get started.
Good morning. I'm very glad to be here today because what I'm going to be talking to you about is what I do probably 50% of my time at work is visit with people that come in or call in that have questions about their farm assessments, and we also deal with lands that have forest assessments on them. I have been with the county for 2.5 years, but I've only been responsible for administering our farm and forest special assessments for just over a year now. And there's a little bit of what I do that's black and white, but there's a whole lot of what I do that's gray area. And so I have been learning tremendously this past year, and there's just always more to learn, more to know. So I'm giving you the best knowledge I have at the moment about this program. So just to give you the very basics of it, and real quickly, those brochures I passed out, some are written specifically for farm special assessment within properties that are EFU zoned. Others of them are designed to give the details of properties that are anything outside of EFU zoning, so we call those non-EFU. But for the moment, don't worry about which version you got, because obviously I don't know what type of zoning is on everybody's properties. Specifically, I wanted you to have one in your hand if you wanted to look at, on the first page, the bulletin list of samples of things that are farm uses per what the Oregon law says, because I referred to that on the PowerPoint, and I wanted you to be able to look through those bullet points when the PowerPoint is saying that. So, at any rate, okay, farm assessment. What does it mean, and how do you get it? And if you, for some reason, don't have it, how do you get it back? So, first of all, from a use standpoint, because we need to look at 2 standpoints, the law states that it's the current employment of the land for the primary purpose of obtaining a profit and money by, and then the bullet points are the ones on that front page that I was mentioning to you, like raising animals and selling them. You'll see the selling in bold, or raising crops, selling them. So it goes back to that purpose of a profit in money. And that is what is required per the law. Okay, from a tax standpoint, what does that mean? Any of your acreage that supports a qualifying use can likely be placed in farm special assessment. This lowers the taxable value for whatever portion of acres we have in or we could put in farm special assessment, okay? We also have to look at soil classes for your property, and that makes a difference as to how even that farm assessment rate is established. Very good soils, we class them from 1 to 7. Excuse me, we don't class them. The state classed them years ago, and then we also look at the national website for soils as well. But for value purposes for assessment, they get classed from 1 to 7. 1 is the best, 7 is the least. And then those soils or those lands have higher value if they're better classes of soils because they can raise more crops or have more beef for animals. Okay, I'm just trying to give a little bit of a sample difference of a tax value. You can see where I've got the red arrows pointing there. We've got 3 fragments of land that say farm use zoned, and clear over at the red arrows, the value they're getting taxed at, you'll see the 176, the 403, and the 44. And then they go up to 17,000, 6,000, 670, I think that is, and then 26,450. Every single property is going to have different value differences from what will be valued for farm assessment or not, and it depends on the soil classes, etc. But I just put this up there to give one sample of what a difference it made, and it came up on this particular property to about a $640 difference on the tax bill. Now, again, completely depends on soil classes, amounts of acreage, etc. Okay, in order to know how farm assessment might affect your property, the first thing I always have to ask people is, what's the zoning of your property? Let's find out for sure. So I just put a sample of the zoning map layers up here so you can see the tax lot that is selected with the red outline. The main red through there I think is I-5 if I'm not mistaken, but the red outline is showing you a tax lot that is in the pink area. Anything, or pink or purple, whatever color you want to call that, anything that's within the pink area is zoned EFU, as that EFU shows. We've got open space, we've got rural residential 5s, we've got RR 10s, 2.5s, that might be some light industrial up there. Anyway, zoning plays into it because, as you see, there's 2 sets of rules per those handouts that I gave you as to what fits for farm use. The criteria is different whether it's EFU zoned or non-EFU zoned, which means anything be different from EFU zoning. Okay, so how do you get farm assessment if you don't already have it? If your property is within EFU zoning, so real quick, you're probably catching on to this by now if you don't already know, but many properties are zoned EFU, but that does not mean they're getting farm special assessment. It just means that's what they're zoned. I so often get calls from people of, somebody took my EFU away, and please bear in mind, we don't mess with that at the assessor's office, okay? That's not our business, that's planning's business. We only put acreage into or out of special assessment, and that's just a computer change, but we do a lot of work and checking up and such before we will make that change. So anyway, for EFU zoning, there has to have been use in the previous year, and when I say use, I mean qualified farm use per what the legislature says, and that's what we had already talked about, that current employment of the land for the primary purpose of obtaining profit money. The person wanting the farm assessment needs to bring income documentation. They need to complete a farm use questionnaire just so that I have some written record of what their farm uses are that they have going on. There is a processing fee, which is per county ordinance for us. It's a one-time to put whatever acres fit the criteria into special assessment. And a quick little blue note here, if the property has a notation that it is has ever had approval for a non-farm dwelling, then those properties have basically had their rights to special assessment, I'm going to say signed away, I might not be explaining that the best, but they do not have the ability to go back into special assessment except for one caveat, but we'll get that a little later. Okay, non-EFU zoning. There has to have been use in the previous, now this says 3 previous in the current year at least. What we would really be looking at for use is, were you using it last year for the farm use, were you using it this year? However, it also needs to provide, or we need to be provided with income documentation that any 3 of the past 5 years meet a certain gross income level. It is dependent upon the size of acreage, and specifically the size of acreage that the owner is wanting to have special assessment on. If somebody had a 100-acre parcel and they really are only farming 10 acres of it, we only need to prove up their farm income meets the minimum level for the 10 acres. We don't have to worry about the other 90. If they all want all 100 in, then we have to look at what the levels are for that, okay? We do need an actual application completed, and there's that same processing fee of the $133, which is a one-time fee in, again, county ordinance. So that's any other properties in any other zones outside of EFU zoning. So anyway, harder to get in when it's non-EFU zoned, because you have to have those back years of income documentation to meet, but it's still very possible and doable if somebody's willing to wait their time, you know, to save their, and it's tax return schedules that we have to see, and that's per law. Okay, how to keep it? Same definition of farm use. Means the current employment of the land for the primary purpose of obtaining a profit and money by those same bullet points. So continue your farm use. Or if whatever you were doing for farm use to get into the program is not working for you, go ahead and try another use that would be fitting per the qualified farm uses. And do understand what's on the bullet point list are not the only things that can be done. Those are just giving standard examples of what are likely the main farm uses that typically would be recognized. But that doesn't mean if you're not in one of those exact things that you don't fit. It's always worth calling and discussing. It's, you know, are you growing something on your land? Are you raising animals or some type of a product that you're using the land to raise that product, and then it's eventually being sold for that intent of profit and money? Okay, so how to keep it in the EFU zones? You have to, anytime I'm going to look at a property and review it and go, okay, does it still fit? Does this property fit the criteria to remain in special assessment? I have to look at, was there use going on in the previous year? Qualified, always qualified use. Is there still currently farm use going on? And it's the current use that's the stronger of the indicator. But looking at the previous year sometimes will make that little difference of, okay, we'll let it go another year if somebody's working on trying to get things, you know, back in order if they haven't been farming very much. And communicate with the county appraisers if there's something that's going to put a hitch in your farm use, but you know, intend to pick it back up. Just visit with me. We'll see what's going on. We'll talk through it, and I'll do my best to, you know, help you with ideas. But we just have to look at what the law says ultimately as to what lands can stay in, what lands at times might need to be disqualified until they can fit again. And provide income documentation if and when you might get a questionnaire in the mail asking for you to just, you know, give us feedback as to what your qualified farm use is that you have going on. And so real quick, I'm going to say, I keep talking about qualified farm use. What would a non-qualified farm use be? If somebody is using all of their pasture land for a couple of pleasure horses that they own, that's wonderful. Their land, they can, you know, do that however they want, as long as they're probably not keeping horses in city limits, but that's fine. But if they're not selling something, or you know, raising, you know, colts and selling the colts, or stud service, or giving riding lessons, they're not using those horses to obtain a profit and money, so that does not fit as a qualified farm use. So that's just an example. Or somebody raising 3 or 4 or 5 pigs, and then their neighbor raises some sheep, and at the end of the year they each trade a pig for a sheep so they can have some different meat in the freezer. If they're not selling anything, we don't have a qualified farm use going on. So that doesn't fit the criteria of special assessment. Okay. For non-EFU zoning, same thing. Once it's already in farm use, keep having a qualified farm use going on. And then we do have to send questionnaires out on we do a rotational basis throughout the entire county. We hit everybody that does have special assessment that's non-EFU zoned. On a 5-year rotating basis, we send a questionnaire and it asks, what were your uses, how many acres, what are you doing? And then we request that either Schedule F or whatever other tax schedule is showing your farm use income, so that we can see that it meets that gross income level, be returned with the questionnaire. And that's what proves to us that the property still fits to stay in the program. And again, it's a requirement that we do that and we check up on the non-EFU properties. The EFU properties, we don't necessarily get to on an every year rotational basis, but they're sort of hit and miss at the moment, but I'm trying to get a little bit better of a handle on how we can be more, I guess, a little more regular about checking those occasionally, just to make sure that the uses they have going on fit the criteria for their special assessment. Okay, how to get it back if a property doesn't have farm use?
I have a question. On that last one, you said minimum gross income. What is the minimum gross income?
It's on the brochure that is
The yellow one? Okay.
whichever one says farm use for non-EFU zones, it's in second or third page.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm glad to visit with you afterwards, okay? Or if we have a minute before I go. So how to get it back, resume a qualifying farm use, call me and say, hey Lori, let's make sure what my zoning is. I want to get back in farm assessment, and always keep documentation of your income, because that's very important to prove to me that you do fit the criteria to continue your farm use. Okay, and then request to be placed back into special assessment, and then you're going to have to meet the same criteria under the previous slides about how to get it. Either questionnaire if it's EFU zoned or the application if it's non-EFU zoned. And I'm sorry, but yes, that processing fee applies again, because we have to go check the property to make sure there truly is evidence of that qualified use going on. Okay, so just some good to know cautions. If EFU zone property is subject to a non-farm dwelling, which is what I mentioned before, it cannot have special assessment. That property has been signed out from having farm special assessment. There's one caveat that if a property is subject to that, and an owner happens to already own or acquire a piece of land that is adjacent, and that does not mean just that the corners touch, but that means there's an actual property line that's adjacent to this one that has the non-farm dwelling status. And if that owner chooses to have those 2 lots turned into one parcel, so they have to join the 2 parcels completely, you can't just do part of the other parcel, it will remove that non-farm status, or it can remove it from the one that had it. And that is per ORS 215.236, I want to say. But that is the one caveat I'm aware of as to how that can actually come up, but it rarely happens also that I'm aware of. Okay, potential additional tax liability. If a property is having special assessment, so it's getting this benefit, and then for whatever reasons it is not being farmed per its qualified use, it might have gotten foreclosed. Nobody's been on the property for a while. It's growing weeds, etc. And if we have to pull it from farm use, so that's called disqualify it, in EFU zones, we have to go back up to 10 years and figure out the amount of dollars that were saved on the taxes. And then that gets noted on the property as a potential additional liability. It is not yet a lien. There are some things that could trigger it to become a lien, and those are noted in the brochures, but they are different for EFU or non-EFU zoning, okay? Those three triggers there on page 3. So in non-EFU zones, we have to do the same thing, but we only go back 5 years, and that is per law. Honestly, it blew me away when I first learned about this, when I started working at the assessor's office. I was like, what do you mean 10 years back? That's crazy. I said, it's what the law says. So that is what we have for the law right now, and that's what we have to deal with. Okay, also good to know on a benefit. Besides the actual size of the acres that are supporting the farm use, having the ability to have that lower tax value for special assessment, when a person living in a home is the one doing the main work of the farming, it's possible that the value of the home site on the property can also have special assessment, and it can make a substantial difference in the values. Another one of my gray areas to determine, does the occupant of this property really do enough of the work of what the qualified farm use is to say that this is a valid, we call it occupied dwelling. And so it's an ODFS, occupied dwelling farm site. So we just do our best on those, but it's another increment of special assessment. It's very hard to qualify in non-EFU zones. In non-EFU, over half of the total household income has to be coming from that qualified farm use on the property in order for the home site special assessment to be available on that property, and it has to be reapplied for each year. In EFU zones, there's no requirement as to the amount of income for the total household as to whether that home site can qualify. Okay, specially assessed home site. So I've got a sample on the difference of tax value here. From a 2011 property, you can see the farm site over to the left, right here. And then the specially assessed OSDs. We happen to break them out in our county. I was talking to the farm assessor at Douglas County the other day. They have those two numbers together as one number. But these two figures, $4,050 is what it's getting valued. But look at the real market value here and here, 25 and 21,000. We've got 46 into 47,000. So it's getting 1/10 of that value for tax purposes. Now, the next screen is going to show when we unfortunately had to pull this one out. And now we've got 16,000 and 16,000, so 32,000 of value that they're going to get taxed on instead of just the 4,000. Okay, sample 2, this is going to be a much bigger one. So same arrows, same values that we're looking at for the farm site. Now look what happened to those numbers. We went to $101,000 and $33,050 on the value just because of the home site special assessment. This makes a very big difference if the occupant is farming. This one is outside of the Ashland area, so we have a big difference in the land values. And just real quick, notice this value for the home site and the OSDs is not tied with acreage. These pieces, there's where your acreages are. So it's just that additional value because this piece of land can have a home on it. So anyway, it can make big difference, medium difference, but at any rate, it's a difference. So. Oops. My PowerPoint just went poof. So.
It says end of slideshow.
But I was basically at the end of my time, and that's what I had to say, and I will definitely be around for questions after the class. So I hope I got you started on some basics of farm special assessments.
I'm Tyler Martin. I'm working at the Jackson County Water Master's Office, but it's administered through the state of Oregon. As you probably know, water rights are a big deal when you're looking at land use. They greatly affect the value of the land, but also they affect the what you can do with it. What can the Water Master's Office do for you? One of the things that we spend a bunch of the depth of the well where water was first encountered, and then where the water static out. And this information gave the department the ability to map many of the aquifers within the state. So we may be able to tell you also where a good area to drill would be, how deep you might have to go. And obviously, these well logs are great for the homeowner too, or the landowner. If they have to do maintenance on the well, they can look and see generally where the pump was set, things like that, where the water level's at, to see how far they might have to drop the pump if they're out of water now, things like that. If you checked with us, or you already knew that you didn't have a water right, you can apply for a new water right. The process can be at times a little bit complex, but we can help with that at the Water Master's Office. The application will actually be processed back in Salem, but we can help you with the initial application and getting everything just how the information that they want to see up in Salem. And then we can direct the forms to the right person. And I'll run through the application process a little bit later, start to finish. Sometimes the landowner might need to just bounce ideas off someone as to how their actions or governmental actions might affect their water rights. And this happens more often than you would think, where something like that would happen. And the water masters here in the basin have a great deal of history here, so they know the basin really well, and they're able to just offer advice about how planned actions might affect your land. Finally, if someone's infringing upon your right to use the water, you can make a complaint. And then we'll do some research, make a site visit, see, assess the situation, and if need be, regulate their state requirement. It needs to be done sometimes. The department's mission is to serve the public by practicing and promoting responsible water management. A common misunderstanding is that the department owns the water here in the state. We don't. The public owns it, but we do manage it. It does this by issuing water use permits. And another person had a water right in 1900. In times of shortage, the person from 1900 would be regulated back until the earlier water right was fully met. There are a few provisions to use. One of them is that the water must be put to beneficial use. And the law states that beneficial use shall be the basis, the measure, and the limit of all rights to use to use the water in the state. And so not just any water use qualifies, of course. Passive water use doesn't apply. Say you have a right to irrigate 10 acres and the acreage floods at some point. We can't count that as use. You didn't actively participate in the irrigation in that case. And there's many different uses. Obviously, irrigation, recreation is one, storage, a number of uses. The beneficial use implies that you can't waste water. So sometimes we see these big gun sprinklers going and they're watering the roads. You guys will see this where they're like way overwatering their fields. That's not allowable. We already talked about priority date a little bit. That's another disclaimer on how water is used. Also, something to note, water rights are pertinent to the land, and that is to say that water rights stay with the land when the land is sold or subdivided or changes hands. So with mining mineral rights, you can sell your land and keep the mining rights in many states. But with water, they're going to stay with the land and keep them. There's a transfer process that you can go through if you want to change the land that it's on. You can say, I own this land over here, I own this land over here. I'm going to try to transfer these water rights over to this land because it has better soil or whatever. But generally speaking, those water rights can stay with the land. Similar to keeping your farm assessment, you have to keep your water rights. So you have to actively participate in the process. Oregon law states that they must be used once beneficially every 5 years. So that's not a high standard to get over. You have to irrigate your field once every 5 years and then provide proof of it. Or you don't have to provide the proof, but you should keep the proof of it. And this can be an electric bill for the pump that you used. It can be aerial photos, affidavits from a neighbor, or something like that. But if you don't use your water rights every 5 years, they could be subject to cancellation. And you can't get them back. There's no process to get them back at that same priority date, which is very valuable if you have an early one. You can reapply for new water rights on the land, but it will come in on the date that you applied. So then you would be the first to be shut off in the next regulation. So if you have water rights, you really want to hold on to them. If you have questions about that, I've got lots of ideas about it. There are a bunch of early water rights within the Rogue Basin specifically. They came in a variety of forms. Back in the day, you would file a claim with the county clerk's office, and then there were some that came with the land grant documents, or with the donation land claims. And that finally got all tidied up in the Rogue River Decree in 1912. To participate in that, you had to file a claim, and then decree maps were drawn up from that, and they were sent to the adjudicator, which was the judge at the time. And finally, he ruled on when, where, and who got what based on those early claims. There are a few exempt water uses. For surface water, there's natural springs. If they don't run off your land, you don't need a water right for them. And that's rare, but give us a call. We'll come check it out. And it can run off as runoff, but not in a defined channel. Stock watering is always exempt for groundwater and surface water. Emergency fire control. If there's a fire, you can take water from anywhere you want. Almost. And impervious surfaces comes up quite often. You can collect rainwater from your roof or driveway. Any artificially imposed impervious surface, you can keep the water. So say you had 10 acres of land and it was hard packed clay. It's virtually impervious, right? But it needs to be artificial. So if you poured concrete over that same 10 acres, you can keep it. For groundwater, stock watering again is exempt. You don't need a water right for it. The same goes for lawn and non-commercial garden up to a half an acre. So this gets a little sticky. A lot of times people will say I have half an acre of garden and I'm going to take that to the farmer's market and sell it. That's not allowed. It needs to be non-commercial garden. If you have water rights, if you have if you're going to sell what you grow, you need a water right for it, unless you're kind of covered under an irrigation district. That's the caveat there. Single and group domestic dwellings, that includes anything you do inside your house, plus washing your car, cleaning your windows, that kind of thing can be done outside. You have that exemption. It's up to 15,000 gallons a day, so it's a lot of water. And then commercial uses are also exempt. You can use up to 5,000 gallons a day. The caveat is commercial can't be irrigation, so you can't be using, you can't say, oh, this is my commercial use, and I'm going to irrigate my land with it. It has to be something different. There are a few ways, a few water sources available for new uses at this point in the Rogue Basin. Lost Creek and Applegate reservoirs. You can transfer existing rights, which I told you a little bit about. The irrigation districts often have water if you're within their footprint. Groundwater is still accessible if you're more than a quarter mile away from a stream. So this can get a little tricky sometimes if you, sometimes you can go a well on someone else's land and then pipe the water over if you need to. If you're trying to get away from that quarter mile, so there's not groundwater, surface water interference. There's still stored water. You can store water in the winter from those impervious surfaces, and then use the water from there in summer to irrigate your land. And skip water marketing for now. So when you go to file a new water right, here's the process. You're essentially going to file an application that'll include where the land is, what your beneficial use is going to be. We'll review it, we'll either deny it or approve it, and you'll get a permit. Then you can construct the system, irrigation system, whatever you're going to do. Then you begin using water, and then thus begins the proving out process, which is the hardest part. You have to show us that you're beneficially using the water on the land in the way that you said you were going to do it. And this goes back to the Certified Water Rights Examiner, where you have to hire someone, they're private contractors, but certified through the state, to create the map to our specifications. And so they've been trained in how to do that. After the proving out process has happened and you've submitted all those documents, and if you actually did prove up, you'll receive your certificate. And that, right now, that process is taking about 10 years from when we get the document of proving up, or the packet of proving up documents, to when we get the certificate. There's just not enough funding to hire people to process those. So you're looking at 10 years, but after you proved up, you have the you have the water right, you can keep it, you just don't have permission to paper yet. And then I'll remind you again about your 5 years of non-use. After you have that, you have to keep using it at least once. And you'd be surprised how many times people say, oh, I forgot to use my water, at this farm, and I didn't use my water because of whatever reason. Oftentimes someone will get sick for a period of time, and no one went out and turned on the sprinklers for a day. So, and again, I have some fun ideas on how to keep that if you know you're not going to be using the land and you want to maintain the water in stream. So normally if you just let the water there, the downstream you use it, but if you want to maintain the water in stream, you can transfer temporarily your right in stream and maintain it to a specified point. And people usually do that for the fish or riparian. vegetation, things like that. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the website and how to research for information, but we're getting short on time. So I will, if you have any questions about ponds, please talk to me. There are some ponds that don't need a water right. Bulge ponds, so if they fall within the footprint of an irrigated area and you're using them as a bulge in the system so that you have a place to pump from, those are exempt, but they need to fall within the footprint of the irrigated area. And then there's two different processes for having stored water. It's called standard and alternate rate. That has to do with dam height and how much water you're storing. Here's that webpage. Thank you. Questions? If you have any questions, I'll direct you to Travis Kelly. He's sort of the line of first approach into our office. He knows the basin really, really well, and I recommend you talking to him. He's a pretty good resource. If you have any questions, I'll be around all day.
Okay. My name's Kelly Madden. I'm the Development Services Director with Jackson County. For today's purpose, I'm oversee the planning division, both long range and current planning, and am the planning director as well as the Development Services Director. You know, when I talked to Wendy about this presentation, and she told me that there were three of us sharing about an hour and 15 minutes. I said, well, you know, the scope of my information is going to be sort of at the 1,000-foot level, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but Oregon state land use is relatively complex. That someone said that's an understatement, and I think that is an understatement. So I am just going to hit sort of the highlights and kind of tell you where to go to get resources, because I couldn't, even if we spent all day long, I probably couldn't cover everything related to even exclusive farm use or laws related to farming or farm use. Not farming necessarily, but use, because really what we do is sort of regulate uses. So let me move forward. So, and I'm not sure, I'm going to kind of go back to the basics. Oregon land use is really a top-down kind of land use endeavor. It starts with at the state level. And Jackson County governs, or is the lands that are outside of cities, so all the unincorporated lands in Jackson County are under the administration of Jackson County. And our land use laws really come almost directly from the state. If you look at our land development ordinance, you'll see citation and citation, state ORS citation or OER citation, primarily ORS citation. But the auspicious statewide land use planning system started in about 1973 with the state establishing about 19 goals. Those goals are related to land use policy, natural resources, those kinds of things. Goal 3 is related to agricultural lands. And those policies are really documented, if you will, in Jackson County's comprehensive plan. So from a land use perspective, Jackson County really has two documents. We have our comprehensive plan that's kind of an overarching policy, provides overarching policy guidelines, and then our land development ordinance, which implements those policies, if you will. I'm going to say this again, and I say this because you heard Representative Buckley talk about how people go about influencing change with the land use system, and a lot of to implement change or influence change, while you can influence it at the local level, like I said, our land use system is really a top-down system, and an effective way to implement change is really via the state land use, the legislature. Oregon administrative rules, well, let me step back. Oregon revised statutes are created directly from the legislature, and Oregon administrative rules provide guidance about how to implement those things. And like Greg said, Sherman Lamb is here. He's on the state land development, LCDC, Land Conservation and Development Commission, and they develop policies and administrative rules. Our land development ordinance in Jackson County can't be any less restrictive than state law. We can be more restrictive than state law, but we can't be less. And the Board of County Commissioners has really set a policy that will be no more restrictive than state law. So the laws that sort of govern land use in Jackson County are really designed to do that, being no more restrictive than state law. So what can you do with your land? And I'm just going to, like I said, this is just the very big picture. Of course, on EFU, growing crops is permitted. Raising livestock is permitted. Fish propagation is permitted. Equine facilities are permitted. Those are permitted outright. To grow crops on your land, you don't have to come in and get a land use permit from Jackson County. To have cows grazing on your land, you don't. But I was trying to think of just some takeaways. So here's a takeaway. If you want to build something on your land, build a structure that's going to house something that you might be processing farm crops, you might be having a farm stand, you might be wanting to build a winery. If you want to construct anything on your EFU land, I would advise you to come into Jackson County or to look on our website. I'll talk about those resources kind of at the end. But that's, people often think, well, I just want to build something and do I have to come into Jackson County and get a permit? It's likely that you'll have to get a permit, whether you'll have to get a building permit solely or whether you'll have to get a land use permit in conjunction with that building permit. Now, we do have ag exempt buildings, and I'm not going to go into that, but if you want to talk about ag exempt buildings, there'll be someone after this meeting, and certainly we can talk to you about that. So you want to build a winery. Growing grapes on your property, not a problem. But if you want to build a winery, or you want to build a farm stand, or you want to build a kennel, well, those are things that are commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. And if I had all day to spend with you, I would be saying that over and over. Commercial activities in conjunction with farm use that are permitted, and state law permits those, but they permit them often via a land use process. And meaning coming in, filling out a land use application, going through not always filling out a land use application, but worst case scenarios, you have to complete a land use application, pay a fee, there's a notice to the neighbors, there's a tentative decision by staff, and then a final decision. Many people, want to have dwellings on their farmland, and that is permitted. You can have accessory farm dwellings, non-farm dwelling, which was talked about earlier, and that does affect your taxes. But certainly you can go through a non-farm dwelling process. And when I say these, I mean these are all land use processes to go through. You can do a temporary medical hardship, oftentimes, and we see this a lot, where someone will be living on their land that's zoned EFU and they get ill and they need someone to take care of them, and they want to put a manufactured dwelling on their property so that someone can care for them. You can go through a land use process to be approved for that, or a lot of record. All those things require a land use process in the state of Oregon. They may be permitted, but you have to go through a process to actually get the permit for them. So I'm way ahead of schedule, but that's good because then you guys can ask questions. So how to help yourself? Because like I said, Oregon state land use is very, very complicated. And even our ordinances, you can imagine when I say the Oregon state land use system is complicated and Oregon administrative rules are complicated, and revised statutes are complicated, and I said, and our land development ordinance cites those, has language that is verbatim of those laws. Our code is, I think, complex as well. So it's important, and we try to provide information so that you can kind of help yourself before you necessarily need to come in to the counter, come into the county. From your home, you can help yourself if you have web access. And if you don't and you have a phone, you can always call us. But we have a lot of resources, online. We have how to do a plot plan. Very important, because really when you come in, if you come into our counter and you want to do something, you want to build a house, or you want to put up a barn, or you want to do those things, we're going to ask you for a plot plan. And this is a really good description of how to create a plot plan. We have handouts on lawful parcel creation, or determining if your parcel was lawfully created, because believe it or not, there are a lot of parcels in Jackson County that while they're parcels and they've been sold for, they've been sold 25 times over the last 25 years, those parcels may or may not be legal. They may or may not have been legally created. It used to be fairly easy to create a parcel and then sell it. You went down, you had a surveyor, draw it up, went to the county clerk, had it recorded, and you could sell it. Well, from a land use perspective, that you can do that. But from how you can use that parcel, it may not be developable. So it's important to know that your parcel was legally created. And if it wasn't, there's a process that you can go through to try to make it a lawful parcel. We used our website. If this was 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have wanted to direct you to our planning website because it was not very user-friendly. As an employee of Jackson County, somewhat savvy of our website, it was hard for me to navigate. I don't think it is so hard anymore. The planning portion of our website, we've done a lot to clean it up and make it easier and make it more intuitive and user-friendly. And I would put a plug in, Charles Bennett is here. He's here to answer any really technical questions you might have today, because I probably can't do that, but he's here. He has been working on our website for about 2 years, making it, I think, easier to use for you. There are planning guides, there are forms and applications. Now our system right now doesn't allow payment over online, so you still have to come in, or you can send us a credit card authorization. But right now, to receive payment for an application, you still have to come into our office. That probably will be changing in about the next 2 years, but right now that's the case. And then, of course, if you want some one-on-one help, maybe you've looked at our website, you've looked at the land development ordinance and the code related to your issue or what you want to do, but you want to talk to someone. You can call or email us. We respond to those calls and emails usually the same day, if not within 2 days. I think our phone line says we'll answer within 3 business days, but we have that because sometimes we have staffing issues, and so I want to create realistic expectations, but realistically you get a call or an email back within about 24 hours. You can come in and talk to a staff person at our counter. Our counter is staffed Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 8 to 4, and on Wednesdays from 11 to 4. And that's a very good resource. Now, I will say that what we try to do at the counter is provide we try to provide the basic information, let me put it that way. If someone comes in and asks what their land is zoned, if someone wants to, ask about things that they can do with their land, we can answer those questions in kind of a cursory manner. But typically we have lots of people waiting for to ask questions, and we have limited staffing at our counter. So if you came in and you had a detailed question or you really wanted to, dig deep into your issue, our planner at the counter would probably suggest an appointment. We offer appointments. They're $202. You can sit down with the planner for an hour and talk with them about what you want to do, talk to them about what you want to do, maybe what laws apply to what you want to do, talk about an application. I think I get a lot of phone calls from people who are confused about the land use process and want to do this and want to do something. They're calling me, and I usually direct them to an appointment because I think it's an extraordinary sort of bang for your buck, because you get to sit down with someone who may or may not be reviewing your application, but our planning staff is very savvy on our code. You can ask us to do research. There's a fee for that. And let me step back. In terms of how we staff the department and planning in particular, the Board of Commissioners has a directive to us to be self-supportive, that our department should be self-supportive, meaning fees should pay for staffing. Now you can imagine with the recession that was happening in 2005, or pretty close, but since the recession happened, that hasn't been the case. But the Board of Commissioners has stepped up, hasn't wanted us to reduce our level of service, and has stepped up with general fund money to help our department. But saying that, please don't be surprised that when you come in to talk with the planner and get something in writing, there is going to be a fee for that. The only thing we do for free is talk to you at the counter. If you want something documented from us, there's a fee for that. And it may be just a zoning information sheet so we can kind of commemorate the discussion. And I think that's 101. 101, thank you, Charles. So like I said, I think those are very good resources that we have for you to help you through what might be a very easy process or might be a very complex process about what you want to do with your land. And with that, I am done. I do want to point out that we have a few handouts up here. We brought some information from Jackson County. There are 2 cards up here, one for Charles and one for Tracy Nickel, who is a senior planner who helped put this presentation together. And we provided a little handout that has all 3 of the presenters' contact information. So if you want, please pick one of these up so you can contact us if need be. And so thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We do have time for some questions, which is good. I want to reiterate what all 3 of the presenters said today. I get a lot of calls, complaints about, I want to do something on my farmland and I'm not allowed to do it. And I say, well, yeah, actually the law has provisions for that. Where did you hear that you're not allowed to do it? Oh, my neighbor told me, or I heard it at a meeting that I went to or something. I highly recommend you take advantage or do what these folks just suggested and call them and talk to them about it, because some things you aren't going to be able to do, but there are a lot of things that people think they can't do that actually there is a way to get it done. So, questions for any of the 3 of them?
I have a question for you, Kelly. I heard that you could build a 200 square foot shed without having to get a permit. Is it still 200 square feet?
Yeah. Is it less than 200 square feet?
Yeah, it's there, and it has to be less than 10 feet tall. So,
Less than 10 feet.
you don't need a building permit for a structure less than 10 feet tall and less than 200 square feet.
And what about a pole barn? You have to get a land use permit for a pole barn?
Well, we could go into, that's part of possibly agricultural exemption from a building permit standpoint, but from a planning standpoint, Charles.
Yeah, if it's bigger than, there's a lot of ifs and variables. Setbacks have to be looked at, how far from property lines, how far from riparian areas. There's also fire safety. If it's a structure larger than 400 square feet, typically you're going to need a fire safety inspection. you can come in or give us a call and we can give you some more specifics on that.
I have a question for Tyler. Do you have any jurisdiction over the Medford Irrigation District?
Technically speaking, yes, since they have a water right, but they're fairly self-sufficient in managing the water.
Okay. Because there is some kind of a little bit of confusion about people who have water rights directly from a canal versus the people who don't and therefore are allowed to pump from creeks that are supplied from canals. Is this something that they can approach you about, or is this something they have to fight with the irrigation district over?
No, let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll look into it.
Yes.
So, the question I hear most often from young potential farmers who I have a lot of contact with is, it takes more than just two people, a couple, to farm successfully usually. And with we no longer have the kind of extended families that family farms used to, be designed to serve. How do we make it so those people can live on their land and farm? A group of people.
Charles, you want to talk about farm dwellings for
Accessory farm dwellings, yeah. I mean, there's accessory farm dwellings for relatives, which is actually a fairly simple process if you have a farm that's taking place. Getting a relative to come onto
This is the exact problem I'm talking about. People are no longer relatives.
right. But there are some accessory farm dwellings for farm workers. That's an application process. The income standards they're kind of high. I mean, it's high value farmland. I believe it's like $80,000, so it's pretty significant. And I know the farming practices have evolved. I mean, like a Wolfer situation, which I'm sort of familiar with, where you have temporary workers coming onto the land. The state hasn't really changed, evolved that way as fast as the reality is today. It's kind of complicated. We have detached living spaces, which are small. You can apply for a small structure that doesn't necessarily have a kitchen, but has a bedroom and a bathroom. And you could, if somebody is staying there and eating in the house, that might be a solution. I don't have a simple answer for you.
And part of that goes back to, every year, every biennium, when the legislature meets, there are, believe it or not, more uses allowed on farmland. I think we're up to
Over 50.
50-something uses on farmland, but it's still, you're talking about this evolution of our culture and this need. And those kinds of things, I think, are, for those kinds of changes to transpire, there is going to have to be some focus, some legislative focus on that.
Yeah, that's true. There's going to have to be some changes made at the state level for that. One of the reasons that it's so hard to do that right now, we hear a lot about how expensive it is for young farmers to get onto new land. If you have a part of a farm that's got 2 or 3 houses on it, it suddenly becomes a lot more expensive to get onto that land. So there's pluses and minuses to the way the system is set up now, and if somebody can figure out that problem, maybe some changes will be easier to be made. But other questions?
If I have a parcel that's part rural residential 5 and part EFU, if I'm trying to get the special farm assessment, do I have to keep separate records for
Boy,
the different?
haven't had that question before. Let's see here. I don't know that you have to keep separate records. I mean, it makes sense that just whatever your farm use is, you're keeping your data from what you're selling. I would be, if you were applying for, say it has no farm assessment, but you want to apply for it, let's say next February. I would have to look at the EFU portion as to what was going on last year, which would be 2012, and now what's still going on for 2013, and consider putting it in along with whatever documentation you can give me for any sales you have going on. And then the non-EFU portion, you would be using that, probably that same income that you have for the whole piece. And for that portion, I have to look at what, do you have documentation for 3 years back? If you don't, then that one we might have to wait 2 or 3 years to be able to put that portion into special assessment. And then there's more specific rules as to looking at the income as to how it fits. And so I'd have to then see where your incomes were each year and see how they fit per what portion is there. Sometimes we just have to do our best estimate to break out what was actually made on this piece of land when it's the non-EFU. But I don't, for any reason, see that you personally would have to keep separate records of here's how much money I made off of this and here's how much money I made off of that, dollar-wise. But it's something that you and I would have to sit down and go through. Okay, I'd have it a plat map out, and I'd say, okay, here's your non-EFU portion. What did you raise here? Okay, and this is 30% of your whole farm use going on, so let's just take of your gross income, 30% of it is what we can attribute to that. You know, we just have to be as reasonable as we can, and then go, okay, now does it still fit the criteria? Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
You're really looking for F returns, right? I mean, that's got to be the most...
Typically Schedule Fs, yeah. Now, some people, EFU zoned, they have the property, they love their house there, they just don't really want to do the farm use. They have somebody else come in and farm their land. Okay, so then I have to say, okay, well, who's your farmer, and are they going to be willing to show me their Schedule F? Okay, if they're not willing, it's funny, sometimes they'll cut off the lower portion of the expenses and they just give me the income. They will mark out their social security number. I don't mind, that's fine. And sometimes they're, do you need the whole texture? No, I don't want to see the rest of it. That's not my business, just your Schedule F. And of course, there's some people whose income is very low, and so they don't even hit the minimum income that the IRS requires them to file a tax return. So then in that case, I'm going to say, okay, well, do you have your receipts you can show me? What can you show me that proves to me that you do have qualified farm use going on? You do have that intent to make a profit in money. That's the wording that the legislature uses.
Another question for Tyler. Is it on the website, Jackson County website, that you can look up if water rights are available?
I would direct you not to the Jackson County website, but to the State of Oregon website. So I always tell people, and this sounds really overly easy, but literally if you Google OWRD, it's almost always the first result. And so that makes it easy, but and I can show you a little bit more later.
Anybody else?
Just real quick, if you're interested in finding out what the soil types are on your property, or if you're looking at leasing or buying some property, you can go on a couple of ways. You can get the information on the soil types, what their capabilities are, what the typical soil or crops are that can be grown on those soils. And you can do that a couple of different ways. There's the Web Soil Survey, which you can go on, and I have some handouts here if you're interested in those. And also have some of our contact information inside it, because, as you said with the Jackson County website, this is not the most user-friendly website in the world, but you can get a lot of information off the website. If you're not interested in doing it that way, I have plenty of these little hard copies of all the soils in Jackson County, and again, what their capabilities are. There are also the land classifications, as you talked about, the classifications 1 through 7 on there. You can get that information. If you're going to use this one, you have to know what your township range and section is, and then you can go on here and there's aerial photos. You can get to those to your property by knowing what the township range and sections are. Look at the aerial photos. It will actually have the soil types on there, and then you can get a bunch of information that we have on file based off of those. I have a ton of these. These used to go real quick until this came online. I now have a ton of these sitting on shelves. If you want one, they're free. Please come and get them. And take them off of my shelf. They're not doing any good in there. This one you can either do by the legal description, the town, ship range, and section, or you can actually just type in your address and it will take it to you, and then you can actually outline your area of interest. It will bring that up, show you all the soil types that you have, and give you all the information you want for those soil types. So if you're interested in that, I've got some here for you.
Great, thank you. Anything else? All right, first of all, thank you to the presenters for a lot of good information. The schedule now calls for a brief break and then I think some networking time. So thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of the day. Just what I'm supposed to say about
If anybody needs a different brochure and you didn't get the right one, you can always take one of the little contact pages that has all of our contact info and call me or email me, and I can either drop one in the mail to you or I can email it back to you as an attachment. I'm very glad to do that.
Thursday, it'll basically give you what to do with whether it's irrigated or non-irrigated, one of those capabilities, and kind of the normal types of crops that are grown on there. Now, if you want to look into it in a little bit more detail, we can work with it, or we can send out one of our planners. Go ahead.
Everyone, I wanted to remind you that
This one has, sir.
is taking place in the main library auditorium. So we're walking up Walker South and going in the side entrance.
Right, and it goes to it, and that does get kind of complicated. This one has. And if it gets too complicated, all our classes, put that in there. So, Paul is very good at working with people that do that whole process.
So we do have our network. I think Charles is going to stay for a while. My mom is
Do it when you're in a very patient mood. Just 11:30.
We have some session networking time, 11 to 12.
Just out here, because I have some flyers I can leave.
The library.
Oh, okay.
But you're welcome to have them out on the end.
Okay.
You know, help you in that or.
No, it's not that bad.
Find an open floor, there's some space, there's no
Complaining
We
about
ran out of space. Okay.